Okay, I think with that, we can get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition April Biketivist Forum. My name is Katie Causey. I'm an organizer here at SVBC. Our monthly Biketivist Forum series aims to empower local leaders with the necessary tools to enhance the region's walkability and bike friendliness. Next month, May, is both Bike Month and Housing Month. As a preview today, we're covering one of the key connecting topics between housing and transit, and that is parking requirements and the builder's remedy. Today, we're covering how parking requirements and building housing impact biking and public transit, and how the builder's remedy, a policy which is making headlines throughout the state for facilitating housing development without local approval, impacts public transit. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tony for introductions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Katie. My name is Tony Jordan. I am the president of the Parking Reform Network. I live in Portland, Oregon. And I'm excited to watch the presentations from these panelists today around, you'll get a general education from about parking reform, and then learn about how the builder's remedy is working in California, or sometimes maybe not working or as we want. I think these presentations are great, and we'll have some good questions and discussions. If you have questions during the presentations, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll be watching that to compile some and ask the panelists after they give their presentations. So that's me. I'll introduce all three of the panelists, and then they'll be going in order. I'll introduce them in the order they're going to present. So first, we'll have Raynell Cooper, who is a board member of the Parking Reform Network, works as a residential parking planner in San Francisco, and he's also on the board of the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, and he's involved in housing and activism in the region. We have Jordan Grimes, resilience manager at Greenbelt Alliance. And we have Alison Cingolani, policy manager at SV at Home. So Raynell is going to first present. Raynell will be presenting about parking reform in general. Jordan will be talking about, I think you could say, good projects with the builder's remedy, and then Alison will give us some cautionary tale about builder's remedy. So Raynell, go ahead and take it away. You're muted right now.
Thanks so much. Yeah, screen all look good. Everything look good here. I'm not a Google Slides person usually. So yeah. Well, thank you all. Yeah, my name is Raynell Cooper. I'm a board member of the Parking Reform Network. Also work as a parking planner, though here fully in my Parking Reform Network and in my personal capacity. I'm just going to go an overview of how parking and biking and how all of these intersect and interact with housing, and lead into a lot of the more kind of technical and specific and really fascinating presentations that Jordan and Alison have queued up. There we go. So I'll just go over how biking, parking, and housing all intersect, the rise and fall of parking mandates, and then street parking, how that kind of interacts with all of this, as well as some things to think about locally at the activist level. So first of all, what is the Parking Reform Network? It's started by Tony, our lovely MC, and is a national network international network of advocates and practitioners like myself, focusing on the impact on parking policy on climate change, equity, housing, and traffic. In the upper right, there's Donald Shoup, who's a UCLA professor who wrote a very influential book, High Cost of Free Parking, and has done a lot of influential research on how parking and land use interact with each other, and the ways in which that we can improve parking to help make our cities safer and more livable and more enjoyable places to live. So PRN supports advocates who work on parking reforms through coalition building and direct advocacy. So this is kind of the center of it all here. I found this graphic to be really compelling. I think people think about parking as parking is often an afterthought, especially on the residential side, and especially in the grand scheme of transportation, sustainable transportation. Oftentimes people think about parking. People start with the bikes and the transit, and then parking is sort of the afterthought. But All these things kind of interact with each other, and specifically want to focus on the more parking and the more cars side of thing. The more parking that we build in our cities, it can generate similar to induce demand on the roadside. If we add more parking, that's going to create more driving and put more cars on the road. And from a cyclist perspective, that's the dealing with the volume of cars is definitely not dealing with a high volume of cars is definitely not great for our safety, not great for cyclist projects as well. So that's why parking is a consideration. Every new parking space invitation for a new car in the neighborhood. So if you build a big parking garage, build new apartments with new parking spaces, those cars will come with. And I think parking, we also oftentimes don't really consider the space of parking, because in the American context, in the North American context, it's such a given, right? That a place is going to have parking, that you need to build something like this. But seeing this side by side and thinking about the physical space that parking takes up really can help explain why parking regulations are so important to understanding housing costs and building housing, because these parking spaces are oftentimes things that could be used for other purposes. We just don't often think of it that way. And so there's kind of two ways to think about things, parking advocacy. The main focus of PRN, the main focus of the rest of the presentation is on parking in new developments and in buildings. As we said, car parking generates more traffic. The more parking built oftentimes will mean fewer homes because of height limits and because of the costs. If you have to build a lot more parking, that may mean fewer homes built, and that leads to sprawlier cities, also more expensive cities. And it can also take away from bike parking, which is something that we want to advocate and we want buildings to be including. There's also a really important on-street element as well. Bike projects often require parking removal, and that means that managing that parking really well and making it so that parking removal is politically feasible is super important to get bike projects built safely. And safe biking and a car-free future really go well together. The more that we can be able to use street space for biking and reduce our reliance on street parking, that will build more sustainable cities, greener cities, healthier cities as well. So parking mandates. This is a great slide from one of Tony's presentations, but it basically is astrology for urban planners. No offense to those who believe heavily and strongly in astrology. I'm very much a Libra, so I can definitely understand the purpose, understand those folks. But it's a pseudoscientific sort of understanding of how a building needs to be built and the way that the amount of parking demand that a building generates. So their requirements, basically parking mandates, also known as parking minimums. They're requirements that new developments build parking on site no matter the cost. Different cities will do it differently and do it for different land uses. This table on the right is from San Jose. I don't believe this is their current law, but for a long time this is what was on the books. And so for a miniature golf course, they would do parking minimums by the tee, so 1.25 per tee plus 1 per employee. All of these sort of really kind of odd formulas that are based on, oftentimes based on very little data or no data, and usually rounded up to like the most that you could ever imagine a place needing, created without real data. And at best, it just makes housing more expensive, but at worst, it makes it completely infeasible for on the housing side of things, as well as the commercial side of things, can mean that having to build this parking makes these developments completely untenable. Another example from the region is Apple Park in Cupertino. There's big parking garages on the south side of the campus there. Apple, maybe they would not have built as much parking, but Cupertino, as part of the development agreement, demanded that they build all of this parking. And even without COVID, the chances of this parking being necessary, especially if other sort of investments were made in housing and transit nearby, seems like it's probably overbuilt parking. In cities across the country, this is Little Rock, and this is from PRN's Parking Atlas, where there's a lot of maps from cities all around the country showing just how much of our downtowns are devoted to surface parking. And this is sort of the inevitable outcome of parking mandates. But eliminating parking mandates getting popular. So this is over time in the last decade or so, more and more cities have begun to eliminate parking mandates. I threw in a plug for Paved Paradise, the recent popular book by Henry Graybar, going over all of these kind of parking policy points for a broader audience. And we're starting to see a little bit of a sort of the end of local control, perhaps. This quote from a Chris Elmendorf quote from an article below. It's really interesting that the builder's remedy, which we'll hear a lot more about later, is actually an older regulation, but has only really been recently used due to changes in the way the housing laws are enforced. And the only time anyone tried to use it after the law was first passed was about parking minimums in Albany. But AB 2097 was a bill that banned parking minimums within half a mile of transit. And that is beginning to have its effects on cities. This is from our parking reform network's parking reform map, and we can see that San Jose has eliminated parking reforms. Not as many other cities in the Bay Area, but because of AB 2097, a lot of the other dense cities are already taken care of. So what parking mandate elimination means for cities, it's great because fewer cars, and there's research to support this, the idea that if the building doesn't have parking, people aren't going to bring their cars to the building and into those neighborhoods. Cheaper housing, that's also borne out in the research that it's cheaper to build apartments in a scenario where there's no parking mandates. Market rate buildings will usually build some parking, but in affordable housing, because the need to build the units and the need to build more housing, those will often not have parking. And this creates kind of an interesting situation for cities, is in that the affordable housing tenants often have no choice as to where they live because of lottery systems. There's also residential parking permits to manage demand, but this as a tool can have some issues. They're almost always underpriced. They're oftentimes used punitively against new residents, and there's actually a law in Sacramento going around right now to make it so that new developments cannot get residential parking permits. So that would just leave the spaces only for the neighborhoods that were already there and not for the new residents. But perhaps that's a political necessity in some cities. This is kind of the RPP overview in Palo Alto. And this is in San Francisco to kind of show the reason that RPP is oftentimes seen as a potential for these new buildings is that the cost inside the building for parking is $3,600 to $5,400 a year, and on the street it's just $170 a year. So the on-street parking is often underpriced. So cities that can figure that out can use that a little bit better as a tool. So real quick, I think as advocates watching and thinking about how you can apply these things at your own in your own cities, even with builder's remedy and all of these other streamlining, there's a lot of work that still can be done at the project level to incentivize developers and push developers to not build as much parking. Bike parking is also a big part of the equation here. Managing the on-street parking is something that I think cities need to do a much better job at, including San Francisco. I'll call myself out on that. There's a lot of going on with e-bike charging, sort of a side thing, but definitely something that cities are thinking about. And won't get into right now into parking benefit districts or shared parking, but you could read more about those at the PRN website. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing around housing and parking that, sorry, I ran a little timer. The biggest thing around housing and parking that advocates should be pushing for is building these dense transit-oriented communities. These will support biking and support cleaner, greener ways to get around. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Raynell. There's some good questions and discussion happening in the chat, so feel free to, answer things, and I'm keeping track of everything that's been mentioned in there. Jordan, would you like to go next? Take over?
I absolutely would, Tony. Thank you so much. Give me just a second to share my screen here. All right. So parking, active transportation, and the builder's remedy. So first off, just an appreciation to SVBC for having me. I'm Jordan Grimes. I am the State and Regional Resilience Manager with Greenbelt Alliance. We are an environmental nonprofit that has been around for just a little while, 66 years now. And we advocate for both sustainable land use policy, the preservation of open space, and climate resilience. And our mission is really to educate, advocate, and collaborate to ensure the Bay Area's lands and communities are resilient to climate change. And we use a fairly unique approach to that. We couple using natural and working lands and equitable nature-based solutions to address climate impacts like extreme heat and wildfire and sea level rise, prioritizing communities that have environmental justice issues that have been historically disinvested, and advocating at the same time for climate smart development that's sustainable, mixed use, affordable, and most importantly, transit oriented, which
Jordan, real quick, I think you're just sharing. I think the screen that you hit the present slideshow from is the one that's still sharing, and not the slideshow itself.
Well, that's annoying. Okay.
I think
Hold on.
I think it may be the which screen you chose to share in Zoom, perhaps.
Is it showing now, Ray?
It's still showing the kind of edit screen and not the slideshow itself.
You want to pick your different, hit the screen share, and then as Raynell saying, there should be a window that's only showing your slides and then not showing the sidebar.
I mean, that's what it looks like on my end.
Well,
I would unshare your screen and reshare it, perhaps.
Okay, hold on. We'll try this one more time. Sorry, guys. Okay, how about now?
Nope, it's still on the home screen. Do you have a dual monitor situation?
I don't.
Okay.
I think you have to share, you have to put it in slideshow before you share your screen.
Okay. All right, let's try this one last time.
Happens to the best of us.
Okay, is it showing now?
Yay! Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll go ahead and advance a few slides here. Sorry about that, folks. All right, so I just want to very quickly talk about this particular issue. Greenbelt is very focused on both climate, the environment, and sustainable land use. And to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about here, sustainable land use policy is really critical to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And when we look at, for example, Palo Alto, which is going to be one of the places we take a look at today, we can see that urban infill is a huge strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This is from UC Berkeley's local government climate policy tool, which helps jurisdictions understand from a policy perspective what the best solution is or what the most impactful solution is to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So on to our actual topic, the builder's remedy. Ray touched on this a little bit earlier, but the builder's remedy has actually been in state law for quite a long time. It was initially enacted in the early 1990s. And the builder's remedy is a colloquialism because saying section 65589.5D doesn't exactly roll off the tongue for most people. We call this section of law the builder's remedy. And really what it does is it allows developers in California cities that don't have a compliant housing element, that is really the plan or the blueprint that the state requires cities and counties to have to show, hey, we are adequately planning for housing growth in our existing communities. For cities that don't have a compliant housing element, developers are allowed to bypass certain local zoning rules. And what exactly are those local zoning rules? Well, there are a number of different things that it allows them to sidestep. So in cities that do not have a housing element certified by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, otherwise known as HCD, by January 31st of last year, which is still, I haven't looked recently, but I think it's about 40, maybe more of the 110 jurisdictions in the Bay Area. Developers can bypass or build outside of existing zoning rules. That's things like how high a project can go, how dense it can be, the amount of floor area of a parcel it's allowed to take up, and importantly, parking requirements, right? Yes, there's AB 2097 that Ray mentioned that allows the developer within half a mile of transit to get out of parking requirements. But there's also the builder's remedy. And so if a project is proposed, in an area that's outside of the 2097 boundary, they can choose the amount of parking that they'd like to utilize as well, regardless of what the jurisdiction would like them to. And so, backing up just a little bit, it's important to explain housing elements as well. Housing elements are the plan that cities and counties have to submit to the state, that blueprint showing that they can actually meet those goals. This housing element cycle is very different than it has been in past years. It started in the 1980s, but this year is quite different in that a number of different laws requiring affirmatively furthering fair housing, basically requiring justice components in where housing is sited, how it's built, etc., have come into law in the last 5 or 6 years to really give the housing element process some teeth. So we're going to take a look at a local builder's remedy project here in Silicon Valley. 156 California Avenue in Palo Alto is a builder's remedy project that was proposed in late 2023. It has 3 total buildings ranging from 7 to 17 stories. You have one 7-story building, an 11-story building, and the 17-story tower that you can see there. This is frankly an example of really good planning. The builder's remedy itself is a very blunt instrument. It really allows for a developer to come in and propose whatever they'd like. In most cases, we've seen what I would refer to as responsible projects, things that are close to transit in high opportunity areas, areas with good jobs, good schools, that have not been building enough housing. And this is a particularly good example of that. The project also is constructed via mass timber, which is a building technique that actually really allows for carbon sequestration and is much more, is much less intensive on the environment than things like concrete and steel. And importantly, the project is immediately adjacent to California Avenue Caltrain station. So this project under Palo Alto's existing zoning could only be a maximum of 4 stories, could only be 40 units an acre, and would require nearly 600 parking spots. It's very different under the builder's remedy. You have a building that is 17 stories, that is 260 units per acre, and that has just 310 parking spaces. Still plenty of parking, but less than would otherwise be allowed, and is 20% affordable. That does not jive with Palo Alto's existing parking standards, which require 1.25 spaces per studio, 1.5 spaces per 1 bedroom, and 2 spaces per 2 bedroom, and which Palo Alto's existing housing element, not their most recent one, but their last one, acknowledges would present they say potential constraint. I think everyone in the field would say that it presents a significant constraint to development. So some benefits of this particular builder's remedy project, or rather of the builder's remedy, in this particular instance, you have increased height and density, which allows more people to live in a high opportunity area that is near public transit. which is great. That's just how we want people to be living. It's less intensive on the environment, and it really makes sense from a transit perspective. You also have a higher number of new affordable units that are coming in here. And you have tax revenue. You're replacing a low density building, an old low density building that wasn't providing very much in tax revenue, as well as new impact fees. That mean the city of Palo Alto is going to get quite a bit more money from this project than they would have otherwise. And fewer parking spaces than otherwise allowed under local law had a huge cost savings to this project. The UC Berkeley Turner Center for Housing has found via their research that parking spaces often cost anywhere between $40,000 to $80,000 a spot, sometimes more depending on whether the spot is underground. And so you're looking at tens of millions of dollars that are saved. That money can be channeled into additional affordable housing, can be transferred into, frankly, less rent for existing residents, all of that kind of thing. So it's a significant savings both for the developer and potentially provides benefits to renters and the community. And so just connecting these things, connecting parking reform, the builder's remedy, and mobility, allowing for more sustainable and compact land uses means that you have more existing urban space to use for things that we know we need. Bus lanes, bike lanes, all of the kind of things, open space that communities need that we don't have enough of right now because it's going to sprawl. And then research shows a direct linkage between neighborhoods with higher levels of density and a mix of uses and people using non-motorized transport. So people who are living in neighborhoods that are walkable and bikeable, unsurprisingly, will walk and bike more. This is kind of a no-brainer, but there have been a number of studies that have been done on this in the past decade, including one from UC Berkeley in 2015 that studied Bay Area neighborhoods and really showed this to be borne out. And then finally, you get more cyclists and more pedestrians, which means more people who are advocating for the infrastructure that we know we need in order to be able to walk and bike safely. So that's it for me. On the builder's remedy, I will pass it on to Alison to show you, that was, I think, a really good example of a good project. I'll pass it on to Alison to show a different side of that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm Alison Cingolani. I'm the policy manager with Silicon Valley at Home. And it is never, I just want to be clear, it is never my intent to rain on Jordan's parade. But it is important to talk about how Builder's Remedy is a blunt instrument and, as Jordan mentioned, has the potential for great good or for great harm. So a little bit about SV at Home and who we are. We're a nonprofit organization that advocates for bold systemic change to meet the housing needs of Santa Clara County's diverse residents. So we engage early and consistently on important policy topics. We have a lot of policy expertise and technical knowledge on our team. And we use that to try to win support for evidence-based solutions that's broad-based from across the community. We acknowledge the need for different approaches, including affordable housing production, the preservation of the affordable housing we already have, and protections for vulnerable residents in our communities so that they're not displaced. We really prioritize community education and building up our area's pro-housing organizations and emerging leaders because we believe it's important to develop our capacity to raise our voices together and create opportunities for engagement and impact. I'm going to give you one quick warning. I was on another panel this morning on a completely different topic, and I'm sitting in a classroom at Mission College with motion-activated lights. So we may have some excitement in which I suddenly go dark. It's cool, I'm still here. I'll wave my arms a little bit and we'll be good. So I just want to start a little bit with why parking advocates should care about housing in the first place. Without housing that's near transit, so we can see the land use patterns that we have right now are the land use patterns that we get with sprawl when we don't put housing near transit. So we get sprawl, we get lengthy commutes that result in increased greenhouse gas emissions, which are threatening us in terms of climate change. We get less bike and pedestrian infrastructure because it's really challenging to build bike and pedestrian infrastructure that can serve this sprawling network of roads. We get an underutilization of public transit because we don't have people that are clustered closely enough together to be able to make use of public transit or to run buses to all of those different places at the frequencies we need to lure people onto them. And we wind up with this massive auto-oriented infrastructure maintenance commitment that millions and millions of dollars in many of our cities are going to every year. That means we can't have the nice things we want because we're too busy trying to pave over all the potholes in the roads. So we need housing and other land uses like jobs and retail and entertainment at significant densities that bring people together, located close to transit, so we can get people out of their cars and make great places for people to live and work and play that are accessible by a combination of transit and walking and biking. So the Builders Remedy project I'd like to talk to you about, I kind of preface this with transit and housing because this Builders Remedy project is at the Berryessa-Bart Urban Village. The Berryessa-Bart Urban Village surrounds the Berryessa and North San Jose BART station. And that's projected with some kind of rosy projections, but to host 25,000 riders daily by 2023. And it's the first BART station in the city of San Jose. So the city has spent years in a robust, detailed planning process with lots of community engagement for the area around the station. San Jose calls these plan areas urban villages, and other cities you might have heard them called specific plans. An urban village is designed to provide a mix of different uses and lots of density in areas with access to transit, which is doing exactly what we need to bring people together to live near where they work and play, and get people out of cars by making it easier to use walking and biking and transit to get where they need to go. The land in these areas, importantly, is mostly privately owned. So the urban village plan guides how the land can be developed by property owners in the future. So currently, this area that you're looking at consists of single-family homes, townhouses, and small apartments. There's a couple of small retail plazas at the corner of Berryessa Road and Lundy Avenue, and the San Jose Flea Market south of the BART station. The Berryessa-Bart Urban Village is the first regional transit urban village plan to be developed in San Jose. Regional transit urban villages are locations with access to major transit facilities of regional significance. And recognizing its emerging role as a gateway to the city, the design of new development within this urban village aims for high-quality environments for public circulation and gathering. So it's worth noting that there have been billions of dollars, billions with a B, of public investment in this site, and that includes federal, state, and local money. So if you live or shop in Santa Clara County, that means that includes a 0.5% sales tax. So thank you for your contribution. All this public investment has increased the value of the property around the station. The Berryessa-Bart Urban Village includes the San Jose Flea Market site, and the property owners decided they want to redevelop this site. So just quickly, I want to kind of read you a nice little aspirational quote here about what the city of San Jose sees urban villages as being. So by the year 2040, the city hopes that the Berryessa Urban Village is a transit-oriented neighborhood in San Jose, attractive for people and business innovation, with many green spaces and recreational opportunities along the creeks, interconnected network of pedestrian paths, pleasant to bike around with easy access to public transit. This neighborhood provides much needed housing and jobs near transit while protecting the existing residential areas. People live and work closely together in a vibrant place with placemaking elements designed to foster a sense of community. That sounds awesome, right? That is exactly what we all want. So this is the original development that was proposed and approved for the site at the Berryessa-Bart Urban Village. The property owners decided they want to redevelop this site, and the developer submitted plans and worked with the city to navigate through the planning process. Extensive ongoing community engagement, mitigating displacement of flea market vendors, and public benefits. Penitencia Creek riparian corridor extending, so you can see that running kind of along the bottom right down here. That extends an existing linear park that connects to Alum Rock Park in the East Foothills. So we're connecting transit with walkable, bikeable access ways all the way through to a very large city park that really serves the region. The approved development includes almost 3,500 homes, along with more than 3 million square feet of commercial space, a 5-acre urban market to try to keep some of the flea market vendors on site, and public park and open space and parking structures. So in this image up along the top here, you can see this kind of vibrant community use with the market. You can see the BART station all the way to the left. So lots of great stuff going on here, really exciting, lots of what we need. Here's a quick overhead view. You can see these gray units along the BART line are the parking that serves the BART line. And these commercial uses in the teal color are shielding the yellow residential areas from some of the noise of the BART line. And the red areas, the central plaza, you have the market, and then 2 different riparian corridors with lots of green space, protection for the riparian corridors, and some walking and biking paths there. Except in October of 2023, the developer used the builder's remedy to radically reduce the approved plan of almost 3,500 housing units to just 451 townhomes, much more expensive, 399 apartments, and 90 condominiums, alongside 45,000 square feet of commercial space. So a whole lot less than what we began with. And again, remembering that the value of this land has been coming from public investment. So there was, when this happened, when this was proposed, there was broad support for intervention from the city, from the community, and from political leaders. So in return for withdrawing the builder's remedy application, the city is going to help create a special property tax district to raise $100 million to fund on-site infrastructure improvements. So in this case, not only did we get kind of a lousy project, we could only avoid that by at additional deep public investment. Not great. So builder's remedy cases are not isolated. There's a neighboring site in various BART station areas. So the orange area that you're seeing here is what we've been talking about. The pink area is another where an existing development has been being downsized from 850 to 407 homes. No telling what they're going to exact from the city to stop that. There are also 6 additional sites in San Jose that replace existing plans or densities with dramatically less dense developments. And in Santa Clara, the city of Santa Clara at the Caltrain station, there's also been a townhome builder's remedy proposed on land that should be much more densely used. Last slide here. Builder's remedy has a lot of great applications, as Jordan showed you. It's an important tool to incentivize cities to comply with state law, but we need the legislature to clarify when builder's remedy applies, where it applies, and that it can only be used to build at or above allowable densities and not abused to reduce the scale of approved developments. And that is it for me.
Great. Thank you all for your presentations. I think those were a bunch of good information. I want to start with a question that came up a couple times in the chat. It's about the parking for Raynell, and the other panelists are also welcome to chime in, but specifically around the interplay, and this makes sense for the Bike Coalition audience, the interplay between housing. So I'm going to kind of summarize some of these questions and comments, but between when you're building housing with less parking and what impacts it might have on the street, in particular, space for multimodal transportation, bike lanes, other things. So is it important what are the strategies I think that the city should look at and best practices to deal with that tension? Should cities prohibit on-street parking before there's new building? Should they remove, add bike lanes ahead of time? Like how do you prevent that spillover from preventing good bicycle infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I think the banning parking outright, I think in places where you can do that, I think is definitely a great place to start. And unfortunately, those places are oftentimes not going to be places near downtowns, near housing. The only places that will likely be politically feasible and any better than removing parking for a bike lane are places that are already relatively low demand. I know we're seeing some of that in the peninsula in areas where there's a lot of vehicular habitation and RVs and things like that. Those are some of the places where parking is just being completely removed. I think it's sort of an interesting question in terms of how you sort of approach integrating these new developments into the existing city. I think there's kind of, the parking mandates, there's the two reasons that it's great that they're getting rid of it, is that it's making housing cheaper and it's also meaning fewer cars. And if you think about parking mandates solely about making apartments cheaper, then you don't necessarily care where the cars go, or if people bring the cars, just making the buildings cheaper is great. But I think it sort of depends on the politics of the city and depends on the politics around the projects, whether or not you want to try to integrate these new buildings into the community, integrate them into a residential parking policy and scheme, and or separate them out and try to say that no parking means no parking. I know in Europe that's a lot more common. They have what's called car-free zoning, where going into the construction of the building is built without parking and without ability to purchase permits. We don't have as much of that integration here. And then quickly on the bike front, I think really the best tool is always going to be parking management, and wherever you can, replacing something like a 2-hour time limit with payment, something that does a much better job of turning over visitors, and then you're able to get that parking demand down to such a point such that removing however many spaces you need to remove for a bike project or a street closure or something else becomes feasible.
Thank you. We had this timely question, and this is probably for Allison and Jordan. Well, I guess first of all, you're welcome to chime in, Allison and Jordan, on the parking question if you have any thoughts of your own. But otherwise, I've got a specific builder remedy question for you. So the question is kind of one that we had ahead of time, but is there upcoming legislation to change the builders remedy laws? What kinds of changes are in play? Would they, in your opinion, make it better or worse than it is now?
So I think that there is some legislation that's in the works to try to improve the builder's remedy. It does some of the things that we need it to do. It doesn't do all of them. And there go my lights. So bear with me for a second and I'll turn them back on in just a minute. So it does provide some clarity around who gets to say your housing element is good enough. Right now, there's some lack of clarity. That means that sometimes cities are saying that they can certify their own housing elements. We need to clarify that that's the state. That's in there. There's also an effort to protect from sprawl, because builder's remedy can also be used in unincorporated areas for sprawl developments. It can also be used to push development into wildfire zones, and we don't want that. To the best of my knowledge, there is not anything happening in the legislature to clarify that the builder's remedy can only be used to at or above allowable densities and not to reduce the density of an already approved development. Jordan, you may want to weigh in on that as well. I think you're probably following that very closely in your role.
Yes, I am. There are a number of different bills in the legislature this session that are, sort of focused on builder's remedy tweaks. There's a bill by Assemblymember Alvarez in San Diego that would, similar to what Allison was talking about, clarify when exactly the builder's remedy applies. Remember that, as I mentioned, this is legislation from the early 1990s when the California political landscape and legal landscape around at the state level around housing looked very different. And so I think there are, quite obviously issues that we're running into that we're, trying to legislate around. Everything Allison mentioned around sprawl. This is something that has been quite an issue around the state, but especially in Santa Clara County, you're seeing builders remedy projects pop up in exurban areas, in unincorporated areas like around Morgan Hill and Gilroy, where You're seeing the builder's remedy not being used to create, towers near transit, but rather new subdivisions. And the good news is that the builder's remedy actually already, I didn't touch on this in my presentation, but actually already has some prohibitions in it to really prevent projects like that. The builder's remedy is not allowed to be used on agriculture land currently with agriculture. So there's and also land that is surrounded, I think, on a couple sides by agriculture. So there's some existing protection, but there are definitely some efforts to strengthen those issues. But similar to what Alison was saying, we have not yet seen legislation, at least at the state level, to really hone in the builder's remedy to ensure that it's being used to essentially to ensure that it can't be used to downsize projects, which is unfortunately what we've seen in some cases, like Alison mentioned.
So obviously there's some uncertainty around how this remedy or this can be applied. And I think for transportation advocates, I know that like when I first got involved in my parking reform advocacy, that kind of led me to working with pro housing advocates. And that's it. I know in Portland, that was a powerful coalition of when we started working on zoning reforms, for example, we had partly from the intersection of parking, because the street and because the road and where the buildings start happens right there. It led to some great collaboration and support for both sides. So I think this is a question for all three of you. How do we, it doesn't have to be builder's remedy specific here. Just what are some ways that the audience can think about getting great quality transit oriented, walkable, bikeable communities, without the uncertainty? What are each of you can go ahead and kind of talk about what you think people should, organizations or activities or things they should be watching for, helping to support in order to get safer streets and more walkable places.
Well, I could go ahead on that. Yeah, I think I mentioned this in one of the comments. All of the builders remedy stuff is really important, and our hope is that with all the various housing changes that we're going to be building a lot more housing in a lot more of our cities in Silicon Valley and beyond. But the cities right now have relatively broad powers over the public right of way in the streets. That's why I love it's as much as I love land use planning. I really do love working in transportation planning because with state highways and exempted and a few other pesky CBC and constitutional issues. The cities have a lot of leeway to do really interesting things, and I know a lot of cities are really pushing for interesting things, at least on the active on the bike side, bike lanes, bike safety, all of that, and obviously keeping pushing on that is really important. But I think thinking more about on-street parking, there's a lot more that cities have the leeway to do, but politically parking is always kind of a third rail in a large part because there's such a built-in pro parking constituency, people who drive and rely on parking and both the neighborhood side and on the commercial side. Business owners are oftentimes going to be a lot more attuned to parking, even if their visitors aren't necessarily always coming by car. So anytime anything progressive in parking happens, it's really hard to get that other side. And we're starting to see a lot of great work in San Francisco, where a lot of our activists in San Francisco are really making that connection between parking, charging more for parking can mean more revenue for transit, more revenue for bike projects, and also just a safer, better managed streetscape and public right of way. So thinking about getting into the weeds in terms of what your own city's parking regulations are and thinking about how those can be improved, and that's something that if you're able to build the political will, get a few people together, it's something that really all of that power right now is at the local level, and so something you can do in your city or town.
Thanks. I would also say that getting engaged in specific plan areas, urban village areas, whatever your local jurisdiction calls them, these are central key areas where the plans are going to influence what happens in multiple projects and the ways that those projects are connected. So as Raynell said, like knowing what's happening in your city, but your cities are doing public engagement processes. They're not always very well noticed, but understanding when those are and plugging into them. I'm looking at what's in the chat, and it's clear we have a group of people here that knows a lot already. You're here to learn, but you know a lot already. So take that knowledge and bring your friends and get engaged in these kind of large and mid-scale planning processes to plug in and get what you need in your jurisdiction.
And just to build a little bit off of what Alison and Ray were saying earlier, as well as to the point of a really good comment in the chat by Bryce, who mentions that redevelopment offers the opportunity to extract public improvements from the developers, and traditionally those things are used for things like wider roads. This is a really important part, because builder's remedy is going to, as I mentioned with the Palo Alto project, your Palo Alto is going to see a lot of increased property tax revenue. You have a building, that was there before that still has a, tax rate from the 70s, thanks to Prop 13, that isn't really contributing a whole lot. That new project is going to be worth a whole lot more and contribute a whole lot in tax dollars. How and where those tax dollars go is going to be up to your local city council, your local planning commission, et cetera. And so, working together to ensure that those funds, in addition to the impact fees, which the builder's remedy does not exempt projects from, all of those projects still have to pay those impact fees, meaning those funds are going to go somewhere. So working together with housing advocates and transit advocates and climate advocates to ensure they're going to the places that we want them to, environmental protection, to new bike lanes, to new bike facilities, is going to be really important. That's really why I would say is get involved with what your local community and your local city council is doing, from a financial standpoint, because all that money is going to go somewhere, and you can help shape where it goes.
Thanks. I think, one of my takeaways here, just as someone who watched your presentations and saw your slides, was just that how and in our own work too at Parking Reform Network is just around, the work never stops. You make a change, you got to see if it works. There's unintended consequences potentially. You have to be open to pivoting and testing and seeing if the policies you're working on are as they intend. And we always keep at it. I think that we're pretty close to the end of this, so I think we, I can say, for if there's parking specific related questions, check out our website, parkingreform.org. As Raynell mentioned, there's resources there. We've got active social media. If you become a member, we have a Slack with a bunch of people that can answer a lot of these parking questions, and I've got them written down. So maybe we can have our community answer some of these questions about parking that didn't get answered and send them back through the mailing list, or make a blog post or something. But I'll kick it back. So thanks for having me and the rest of the panelists, and I'll kick it back to Katie for closing comments and information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. All right. Thank you to all of our speakers. For any of our local teams in attendance, the local team meeting will be tonight at 6, and we hope to see you all at the next Bike to Fist Forum. Thank you all so much again.